if it would be helpful to you, because on Tuesday in class, it's you on your own with this document. There are multiple choice and short answer questions you're going to answer in a timed session in class on Tuesday. Yes, Jameson?
I thought it was a timed writing.
And when you finish the multiple choice, you're going to do timed writing. The timed writing will not be the entire passage, okay? Instead, I have pulled 2 or 3 paragraphs here and there, and different people have different passages around the room, and you will be asked to write a rhetorical analysis just on the paragraphs that I've assigned to you, so that you can focus in a much deeper way and do some good analysis practice. And it's not like it's completely cold, because we will have already gone over all of this, so you'll know, or at least have some kind of idea. All right, so we got through paragraph 11, and I asked that you read on your own paragraphs 12 through 18. So he starts in paragraph 12. Let me get my...
Mr. Mayor, grab that real fast.
I'll do it fast. Get my different glasses here so I can see a little better. Almost fell off the chair. If that would have been on video, then it would have probably gone viral. Okay. When he says, you said this, you express a concern, I understand why you have that concern, what do we call that when we are recognizing the other person's position?
Concession.
It's concession. So you share a great deal of concern about our breaking laws, but let me tell you, I think there are some laws that should be broken. Now my question for you is this. He says there are just laws and unjust laws. What are some of the characteristics of unjust laws that he mentions in that second paragraph there?
They go against like the moral code.
They go against the moral code. So they would be something that wouldn't stand up against, like in the Judeo-Christian culture, the 10 Commandments, or about what we think are right and wrong. So good, Caden, that's one. What's something else? It goes against the moral code. It what? Distorts the soul. It's harmful to people. What's a good word for that when it takes away their humanity? Dehumanizes them. Great. Anything else?
Degrades human personality.
It degrades human personality, hurts them, harms them. I want to talk a little bit about this I-it and the I-thou relationship. When we read the Grace Muka Kabira letter, we talked about how the Hutus put all these messages out over the radio waves about the Tutsis. And people didn't see the Tutsis the same anymore. Because what do you remember? What did the Hutus call the Tutsis? Cockroaches. We must exterminate the cockroaches, they said. When King is talking about the I-it rather than the I-thou, and thou is one of those good King James Version words instead of I-you, he is saying when a person feels so superior to another group and puts that other group where it is no longer human. It is what Hitler did to the Jews. It is what the Hutus did to the Tutsis. The people who study genocide say the rhetoric always starts before the killing does. And so when one group of people sees another group of people is not human, doesn't matter how we treat them, like animals. That's dangerous. And those laws are dehumanizing like this. There's at least one more thing about an unjust law. Does anybody know what it is?
Majority, minorities.
Yes, it like targets minorities and, how were you gonna say it, Matthew? The majority what? Were you saying that? Art, sorry.
Majority inflicts it on the minority.
Yes, and they have no voice. The minority doesn't have a voice in what they're doing. That happens to children all the time. Children don't get a voice in the rules that they have to follow. Why is that? Because what are we concerned about for children?
Safety.
Keeping them alive. And so sometimes there are safety rules that maybe children don't understand yet. Why aren't the African Americans getting a voice in the laws that they are having to abide by. There have been voting rights passed, but there are all these barriers to voting. And so maybe they have to pass a literacy test, or maybe they have to, show a particular thing, or be, remember the ones from even after the Civil War, land ownership or whatever it was, okay? So they are not getting to actually voice how they feel. Great, good, glad you remembered that. Obviously you did some good reading there. Let me go down a little more. Let's look at paragraph 17. There are a couple of allusions in that paragraph. To what are they alluding? There is a discussion. That's the second time we've seen this. I think is this just the second time? Because we're going to see Socrates at least 3 times. So there's Socrates, but look in paragraph 17. Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel. Those are allusions to what?
Bible.
The Bible. They are actually all in, I think, the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. So there's some great biblical allusions there. Why does he use these particular biblical allusions? Or
because they were minorities being persecuted.
They were minorities being persecuted. Ancient examples of civil disobedience. Okay, so we're going to talk about civil disobedience here in just a minute, but I do want to make sure you understand Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel. Does anybody know, does either of those stories?
Kind of.
Okay, well tell us what you know, Jameson.
What I don't know much. All I remember specifically is that Daniel was like not abiding by the laws and he was thrown into the lion's den,
Okay.
but the lion didn't kill him. That's
Okay.
about all I know.
So let me do a little background. Anybody know anything about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Or did you see the VeggieTales, Shadrach and Benny? Do you remember that? Did you guys ever watch VeggieTales?
I did. I
Okay.
it's been
It's like a giant bunny. Anyway, it's an Easter one, so it's kind of fun because the Easter bunny gets to do stuff. But Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had originally been Israelis. They'd been Hebrews. The Hebrews eventually became Israelis. They had been a mess in their country. In fact, they'd all been one country. The kingdom had split in 2, and they were defeated in war and hauled off. Some terrible things happened back then. If one country defeated another country, they took that country to be slaves to them. And what the Babylonians did when they defeated the Hebrews was they took all the smart kids. It would be like if they'd say, we're taking all of the smart people in your community and we're hauling them back with us because we're using their minds. And that is exactly what the Babylonians did. They were fools. I mean, wouldn't that be the smart thing to do, is to take all the intelligentsia and use all of that intelligence to help yourself? So 2 different examples of disobedience. One is Daniel. Daniel refused to eat things that his laws told him he shouldn't eat. And for that reason, he ended up being thrown in the lion's den. King Darius was his king, but Daniel was thrown in the lion's den. The lions, who were hungry, did not eat him. He spent the night in there. He was taken out. And it was an example of civil disobedience. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were told they needed to bow to a giant statue, and their laws, their Hebrew laws, which would be the 10 Commandments, stated that they should not bow down before an image of any kind. And so they said, sorry, we're not bowing down. And so because of that, they were thrown into a fiery furnace to die. Nebuchadnezzar the king was so ticked off at them, he said, I want you to turn that furnace, I want it to be 7 times hotter than it normally is. It was so hot that the people who bound Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and threw them in there died because of the heat. Somebody looks in there into the furnace and they said, oh my goodness, there are 4 people walking around in there. One has the likeness of a god. And come out here, Nebuchadnezzar says. And Nebuchadnezzar said, oh my goodness, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had no hair singeing, no smell of fire or anything. And he said, really, we should be worshiping the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, here's the thing about both Daniel and those three very smart young men. They did not fight the punishment that they feel like they were given unjustly. So, civil disobedience, we understand what disobedience is. Let's talk about being civil for a minute. And this is not like civil engineering like the city. What does it mean to be civil? Peaceful and polite. Like my mother used to say, you will talk to me in a civil tongue. In other words, you better be respectful and polite. So, here's how civil disobedience works, in disobedience period. If somebody came in and said, Mrs. Ryan, you have to teach up here. You cannot cross this line when you teach. And I think, that's not right. That's unreasonable. I need to walk around the room and work with my students. So I can either say, to you, maybe I say something bad, maybe I curse, maybe I try to fight them, and I can say, I'm doing whatever I darn well please. Now I'm going to walk across this line and teach my students anyway. So I've disobeyed, but not in a very civil way. Civil disobedience would be for me to say, I know you said that is the law. I don't think that's right. I'm telling you right now, I am going to disobey this law. But I am willing to accept the consequences. So, I'm walking across the line, and there you go. Go ahead and arrest me if you must, because I don't think this is a reasonable law. So when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Mahatma Gandhi, when Martin Luther King Jr. said, we believe in civil disobedience, they were saying, it's not that we don't respect you, but we are respectfully saying this law is wrong, and we are going to disobey it. Okay? Make sense? Look at 18. Even in the 1960s, how did people feel about Hitler?
Hated him.
Yeah. And so immediately, when they say, hey, just a reminder, everything Hitler did was legal, which means that maybe our laws right now are what? Yeah, they're flawed. They're not just because they're dehumanizing in some way. And King goes so far as to say, if I lived in Germany, I think I would have tried to help the Jews. If I lived in a communist country and Christians were denied their right to worship, I think I would help them. I would protest those things. So he gives some more modern day examples. He gives the ancient examples. He gives the modern examples. All right. I want you to read paragraph 19 to yourself. I'll ask you a question, and then we're going to go through paragraph 20 together. Oh no. My first question for you about paragraph 19 is, what is a moderate? Somebody in the middle. So like President Joe Biden considers himself a moderate. There are people that are far more liberal than he is in the Democratic Party, and of course we know people that are far more conservative in the Republican Party. So he says, I'm kind of a guy in the middle. white moderates, it's really interesting what he says. He thinks are worse than the what? Yeah, which we would go, oh my gosh, they're the worst, because they are the people that are burning crosses and doing all of those bad things. Because the white moderates are what? Doing nothing. So at least we know where we stand with the KKK. The white moderates, they're not helping, they're not hurting. Oh, we're so sorry you're going through this. So there's going to be a whole section where he talks about the Christian church in the day, and that's something I'm going to have you like read on your own, just because it's really interesting. As a member of the church, he has quite a bit to say about how the church is acting or not acting at this time. Next paragraph, very powerful paragraph. Tell me what we have a series of as I'm reading it. In your statement, you asserted that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. If something precipitates violence, what does that mean it does? Prompts it somehow. But can this assertion be logically made? Isn't this like condemning the robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Like saying to somebody, well, you shouldn't have had that money, because if you had that money, you should have known you were going to be robbed. Okay? Isn't this like condemning Socrates because his unswerving commitment to truth and his philosophical delvings precipitated the misguided popular mind to make him drink the hemlock? Does anybody know what happened to Socrates, how he died? He was made to drink hemlock, which is poison, and so he died. It wasn't like it was necessarily it wasn't his choice. Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to his will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? Like, do we blame Jesus and we say it's his fault? He was crucified. We must come to see, as federal courts have consistently affirmed, that it is immoral to urge an individual to withdraw his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights because the quest precipitates violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. He has a series of what? Rhetorical questions. And what is the point of all of those questions? He said it's illogical to blame the what people? Yeah, the protesters. Why are you blaming the protesters? You're saying the protesters are the ones causing the violence in the community. He's like, it's not their fault. They are just like the person who has been robbed. What have they been robbed of? Their freedoms. Okay, good. And then he says, this is like a great clincher sentence here. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. On the back, starting in paragraph 21, he is going to talk about time, okay? So I want you to read that paragraph to yourself, and I want you to tell me a question for you. I'm telling you ahead of time. What is he saying about time? Okay, so time isn't good or bad, it's what? Yeah, we all know we can waste time or we can utilize it. And sometimes wasting time is really good for our brains. Just like sitting and doing nothing can be really good for us. He does use the word vitriol and vitriolic. Vitriol is the noun, vitriolic is the adjective. What does it sound like those words are? Vitriolic words, what kind of words?
Negative, hateful.
Yeah, negative, hateful, full of hate, in fact, is what vitriol is. And then he says we are co-workers with God. Oh, so what has he said about the movement he's part of? It's what? It's religious. I'm a co-worker with God. What is that? If I said that, like a prophet, it puts whatever I'm doing, it looks like who approves of it? Yeah. And so, you know, he's just saying, he feels like what they're doing has their actions have God's approval. Okay. You spoke of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my non-violent efforts as those of an extremist. I started thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. One is a force of complacency, made of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, have been so completely drained of self-respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation, and, on the other hand, of a few Negroes in the middle class who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, because at points they profit by segregation, have unconsciously become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force, we're talking about two extremes here, the ones who are just so used to it, they don't care, or the ones who benefited somehow from segregation. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred and comes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in the various black nationalist groups that are springing up over the nation, the largest and best known being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. Do you know of another violent movement, black nationalist movement? Malcolm X, good. This movement is nourished by the contemporary frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination. It is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, which means they rejected it, and who have concluded that the white man is an incurable devil. I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need not follow the do-nothingism of the complacent or the hatred and despair of the black nationalist. There is a more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I'm grateful to God that through the Negro Church, the dimension of nonviolence entered our struggle. If this philosophy had not emerged, I am convinced that by now many streets of the South would be flowing with floods of blood. And I am further convinced that if our white brothers dismiss as rabble-rousers and outside agitators those of us who are working through the channels of nonviolent direct action and refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of Negroes, out of frustration and despair, will seek solace and security in black nationalist ideologies, a development that will lead inevitably to a frightening racial nightmare. Two groups, don't care, have adjusted, just don't have it in us to fight, or violent group. Why is he speaking about those two extremes? Because what's he implying?
He's moderate.
He is a moderate. Good. What else is he implying?
He's holding them back.
He is holding some people back because what could be happening in the streets?
More.
He said there could be floods of blood. And so, hey, what do you want here? This is something we don't want in our streets. Next paragraph continues this. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The urge for freedom will eventually come. This is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom. Something without has reminded him that he can gain it. Consciously and unconsciously, he has been swept in by what the Germans call the zeitgeist. And with his black brothers of Africa and his brown and yellow brothers of Asia, South America, and the Caribbean, he is moving with a sense of cosmic urgency toward the promised land of racial justice. Zeitgeist is the spirit of time. Like they've been caught up with the spirit of rights and freedom. You might think, what the zeitgeist of your time is. Like, I think you're a more generous and compassionate generation. Okay? You're thinking of the word that means you want something bad to happen to somebody, a different word.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, because I know I did the same thing. I even checked my definition on
I was
zeitgeist.
thinking of a character
Oh,
who's named after that doesn't make
Doesn't
sense
fit
with
that?
Well, honestly, it's either, but
well, and you might look up, there might be, but this is the definition that our trustworthy dictionary gave us. Recognizing this vital urge that has engulfed the Negro community, one should readily understand public demonstrations. This is a really important part here. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations. If it's latent, that means they're like dormant. They're in there. He has to get them out. So let him march sometime. Let him have his prayer pilgrimage to the city hall. Understand why he must have sit-ins and freedom rides. If his repressed emotions do not come out in these nonviolent ways, they will come out in ominous expressions of violence. This is not a fact. This is not a threat. It is a fact of history. So I've not said to my people, get rid of your discontent, but I've tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be challenged through the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. Now, this approach is being dismissed as extremist. I must admit that I was initially disappointed in being so categorized. So he says it's great for the people to march and do all of these things, because what's the alternative? Riots, violence, blood in the streets. You have seen already in your lifetime where riots got out of hand. You've seen people shot, you've seen businesses destroyed because people weren't marching in peace. Or there are people marching in peace, and there are people that went along and wanted to cause trouble, and people don't know the difference between the protesters that are peaceful and those that aren't. So you've already seen some of those things in your life. But as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a bit of satisfaction from being considered an extremist. Was not Jesus an extremist in love? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the gospel of Jesus Christ? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand, I can do no other, so help me God. Who's Martin Luther?
95 Theses.
The 95 Theses. He was the person who changed church. So he helped birth the Protestant church as we know it today. What do we see? He has a series of what? Rhetorical questions, but they're followed this time by what?
Allusions.
Yeah, and a quote from the person, a quote from Jesus, a quote from Amos, a quote from Martin Luther. Was not John Bunyan an extremist? I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a mockery of my conscience. Was not Abraham Lincoln an extremist? This nation cannot survive half slave and half free. Was not Thomas Jefferson an extremist? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate, or will we be extremists for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice, or will we be extremists for the cause of justice? Woo. Okay. Really powerful, really good. Forcing them, questioning them. When we analyze rhetorical questions, we have to say what feelings, what thoughts those are evoking. What do you think of these? Because they're kind of hard. There's all this list of these extremists. What is he wanting them to think about?
Good things in history that have happened during
Yeah,
history.
hey, if Martin Luther King Jr. is saying, if I could be in that same category of extremists with Martin Luther, Jesus, all these guys, he's okay with that. Because all of these guys made a difference in history. They changed history. He was like, hey, I'm good with that. Okay. I am going to stop this video and you guys read the rest on your own and look at the questions on the thing. And I'm going to do a little bit more with you guys that are here in the room.